By law, water would be sold at a fraction of its cost to small 160-acre farms. It was true that many small farms would soon get government water. But eventually, the largest recipient of the largest water project in history would not be a small farmer, but the Southern Pacific Railroad, largest landowner in California. By World War II, CVP canals would work their way south and soon transform the valley into the breadbasket of the world. Far to the south, farmers around Tulare Lake began lobbying for their own water project.
At high water, it would be 45 miles, about 22 miles down that way and about 22 miles up this way. And then it'd be about 10 miles wide and 10 miles this way, 10 miles west, 10 miles east. And then you'd be about 22 feet deep if it was the deepest part of the lake. That was by the water witch soundings on there. And then your fish should be swimming by you.
Tulare Lake was 2 million years old, one of the oldest lakes on Earth. 45 miles long, it was the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi.
When it flourished in May and June with the runoff of 4 substantial rivers, the whole Tulare Basin, it could be twice, 3 times the size of Lake Tahoe in wet years. It was probably the last place in the Central Valley that really was wild.
If you get a lot of rain, we had a lot of lake. If we didn't get much rain, we had very little lake. And that's why a lot of people say it's kind of a magical lake. You know, a lot of rabbits and coyotes and things like that. So it was just a real nice spot, you know, for hunting and fishing.
For years, North American wheat has been produced most profitably on large farms. But today, none is more thoroughly industrialized than the 50,000-acre Tulare Lake Ranch in San Joaquin Valley, California.
Not far from the lake, on land once claimed by Henry Miller, some of the wealthiest farmers in the world raised wheat and cotton.
We have about 35,000 acres of grain and about 7,500 acres of cotton. We have 250 miles of canals and ditches on our ranch. All of our land is under irrigation.
In dry years, growers could farm bits of the lake bottom, but they wanted to farm it all. In 1940, the Bureau agreed to build irrigation dams on rivers feeding the ancient lake. The law would then force growers to sell off their huge holdings into small farms.
The idea of subduing nature has captivated the whole country. There's practically no dissent. No, the kingpins are the Army Corps of Engineers, Civil Works branch of the Army, and the Bureau of Reclamation. Congress cannot appropriate enough money fast enough for these agencies to build more dams. I'll give you your dam, you give me mine. That's the way it worked.
Here's 2 federal agencies going to 2 different committees for authorizations, 2 different sets of rules, all financed from the same pocket, the Federal Treasury.
And the Corps and the Bureau ended up in a bitter, bitter rivalry over who could get to the next dam site first.
The Corps of Engineers had far different legislative authority. They could build a project without acreage limitation. They could build a project with no operation and maintenance responsibility for the beneficiaries of the project and no repayment responsibilities from the beneficiary of the project. So this was pretty tough competition.
The Corps dammed the rivers, dried out the lake, and then brought back what had been Tulare's water to irrigate the dry lake bed.
Could have been many hundreds, thousands, many thousands of small farms became these giant agribusiness empires. These corporations amassed so much wealth from this water, which was practically free. They basically have run agriculture in the southern San Joaquin Valley ever since.
There are thousands of acres of cotton in here, thousands really. I'd say probably 1 million acres right in this area all around us. From way back there, you can see as far as you can see is cotton. So, you know, it's big acreage, and it really overwhelms people who come into the area and look around. But the water is the essential thing. Without that water, you can't grow the cotton.
I was down in Tulare Basin just a couple of years ago, and I tried to find the lake. I knew I was approaching it, and at one point I was suddenly on it, and then I was miles into it in my car. It's gone. It's completely obliterated in a few years.
What had been Tulare Lake is now 50 miles of plowed cotton field along Interstate 5.
This is just like Las Vegas. It never stops.
I can remember some of the farmers in my father's front room talking about disking the land, plowing the land 24 hours a day, keeping the tractors that were turning the soil, preparing the soil for planting, and how they would swing in quarter-mile swaths and swing around. And, you know, it was a ballet of linking huge tractors together to flatten the land, to level the land, to turn the land, to irrigate.
We had built the CVP to relieve strain on overpumped groundwater. But with so many acres of new crops, farmers increased their pumping. The aquifer fell. And now, the exploding population of Los Angeles wanted valley water. After all, California farms use more water in a year than LA could use in half a century. Even with the Central Valley Project, Californians once again wanted more water.
This is Pat Brown. This is Papa Brown here. This man promised California farmers that they would have plenty of water.
Growers asked Governor Brown to build a state-financed flood control and irrigation project.
Well, my father seemed to be obsessed with water. He talked about it all the time. In fact, I remember when he would give speeches running for governor the last time, he would give these speeches and talk about water all the time. And he'd come back and he'd say, I know it's not sexy. I know people aren't listening, but water's important.
He fought for it, made it happen. A man-made river, 600 miles long. Water for homes, for industry.
It's always a disaster, whether it's a drought or a flood, that gets the state rolling again. And in 1955, one of the worst flood episodes in the history of the state occurred, where the Yuba River went over its banks, and the Yuba City, a fair-sized town in the Sacramento Valley, was almost destroyed.
Pat Brown knew that almost all Californians believed in flood control and irrigation.
He wanted to build a state water project. It was an unheard of idea for any state, even a rich state like California, to build something that big.
Governor Pat Brown of California joins with Universal Pictures executives to open the new Studio Center.
With swing votes from Los Angeles, Brown's state water project squeaked by on a 3% margin, the biggest bond issue ever by any state for any purpose, even though we already had the largest waterworks in the world.
The theory was that if any water reached the ocean, it was wasted. And so you had to grab it and put it somewhere else.
Large-scale excavation projects, such as harbors and canals,
The University of California and the Atomic Energy Commission tested nuclear explosions for excavating waterways.
Sedan was detonated at 10 a.m., July 6, 1962. The dome rose to a height of 290 feet before it vented at 3 seconds.
When testing became a public relations disaster, officials abandoned any thought of nuclear canal building in the Central Valley.